Welcome back, guys. This is, of course, the Talk 20s podcast, the podcast that helps you navigate your 20s with all the honesty, truth, and laughter. If you've ever asked yourself, how do I start a business on a budget? How do I make my first 100K? And how do I even go about hiring people when I am broke? Well, this is the podcast for you, as we're joined by author, CEO, and Forbes 30 Under 30, Nafisa Bakkar. Before we dive into sharing the highs and the how-tos of building your first six-figure business, please don't forget to hit that subscribe or follow button. The more of you that do, the bigger and the better the guests that we can bring you on the podcast. Now on with the show. Hello, Nafisa.
Hi, Gabby.
Welcome to Talk 20s podcast. We've been trying to get you on the podcast for ages. We've been trying to get it in your diary. You're a busy girl.
I'm so sorry. It's honestly taken a year to get here.
It's because I picked up your book and I absolutely loved it. And I was like, I have to get Nafisa on the podcast because I thought it was the best book that I'd read in relation to my experience of starting a business. And I cannot wait to dive into that today on the podcast. But we always start the podcast by asking our guests to share a picture that probably no one's seen or you haven't shared very, very openly from this time last year. Because we want to tap into what was Nafisa doing this time last year? Go on. I'm excited to see what you've got.
Okay. I won't lie, this time last year was a good month for me.
Really?
Because my book came out this time last year.
Oh, exciting.
So I was going through loads of stuff, but I would probably have chosen this picture of me in Istanbul.
Oh,
because
gorgeous.
I don't usually share when I'm on holiday or when I go away.
Beautiful.
Kind of as a private boundary of being chronically online.
Yes.
So if I was to share anything, it's probably all the times that I'm on holiday and I try to not make it content.
So obviously you said you run a digital business.
Yes.
So that's why you're alluding to being online all the time.
Yeah.
Do you struggle with that balance then?
I think now I have really clear boundaries. I always put my timers on. Obviously, sometimes I override them. And I think having built out a team now helps hugely because we spread the load of being chronically online now.
This is not such a big part of a requirement of your job.
Yeah, it's not my personality type anymore.
I love that. I think a lot of us can admit to especially if people tuning in right now are, young business owners, you kind of have to spend a lot of time online. There isn't many businesses where that isn't the case because even if you're doing something like a bakery, most of the time if you want to make it, you can have to be posting and attracting people online. So I think a lot of people would find that very, very relatable.
Yeah.
So what do you do? Those pictures are just for you, right? The ones where you're in Istanbul?
When I'm on holiday, I will literally take photos and videos like I'm an influencer. There is so much stuff that I take, but it's literally for me or maybe really, really close friends. But I'm wary of the best parts of my life being behind the scenes and not out there for consumption.
It's very interesting. Yeah. Well, give us a little bit of an insight to you. Obviously you've written the book, How to Make Money, an honest guide to going from an idea to a six-figure business. Why were you the person that needed to write that book?
So I think for me, it's the typical cliche of I wrote the book that I wish I had when I started out. And when I was starting out, to set the scene, I had been at university studying natural sciences, so not related to business. I was kind of thinking maybe there might be this thing that I want to work on. I didn't even think of it as a business. I just thought, there's this thing that I think I want to build. And I started out with no network, no capital, no industry knowledge. And I was just constantly trying to fill the gaps. And I would often find myself putting other people on pedestals and just thinking they've got something that I don't. They've got something that means their business is going to work and mine won't. And this book was for me about creating accessibility into business because I often found myself in rooms where I didn't see people that looked like me, from being a woman, being a Muslim woman, being a South Asian woman. And I wanted to get behind the smoke and mirrors and a lot of the hype that you see online, because you go online and it feels like everyone and their mum is earning six figures. And the reason why I wrote this book is I wanted to put something together really honest that goes behind the scenes, that talks to other founders and kind of goes, what is the reality? And the reality is it's often a lot slower than people think.
And like this book has been out in the world for like a year now. So you've had like started to get feedback from people. What have people been saying about this book?
A lot of people have said, I never thought I would, like they would never read business books. It wasn't something they'd ever looked at, but they kind of were like, this felt accessible to them. And that's like what I love, because I think businesses are started by people from all sorts of backgrounds, because business is basically asking a question. You're either asking like, how can I make a podcast to help people in their 20s? How can I create a media platform for Muslim women? In the book, I interview loads of founders. One is, how do I make coffee from Yemen into a business, and loads of other founders. And so for me, all the readers have sort of validated the fact that this is an accessible book, because they're people from all sorts of backgrounds. And some even, there's one reader that I met and she said she by her words, she worked for corporate America. And she's like, I had no like inkling. I didn't ever think of myself as someone that would start a business. And she was like, by the time I was done with this book, I quit my job and joined a startup.
Wow.
And I was like, that is like gold for me. So for me, the readers that I hear from are really from diverse backgrounds, a lot of them who have never seen themselves in the business world. And so this was like their route in.
I think is that and so much more. Like I read the book, and if there's any book that I recommend to any of our listeners that want to start a business, that's where you should start. And I do, because I really feel like it's the honesty, it's the actual reality. I think a lot of what you see online is, do X, Y, Z and you'll make money fast. Like it's not like that. Like, and there are so many different nuances, so many different things that we're going to dive into quite a bit in this episode. But I think a really good place to start is, why do you think that some businesses succeed and some businesses fail?
So I think one of the key things, there's two sides. There's the technical side, which is a business doesn't, there's a technical side, which is where they don't fit the need that they're trying to solve with a money-making market. And so that's when you like break down to the fundamentals of, can this business make money? And that's all around product market fit, which is where you're also up against the time. So especially if you've left your job, if you've got dwindling savings, if you need this business to make you a salary, your willpower, all of that is going into being up against the clock to try and make money from this business. So one of the things is people don't make money in the time limit that they have for themselves. And that's why if you're working on something on the side of a job and things like that, you're basically giving yourself more time. You're increasing your odds in some ways. And then there's the other side of like, because you're up against time, you're also depleting your willpower. You're depleting your energy, your own like sense of ambition, your vision. The longer things are hard and a slog, the more likely you're going to be like, do you know what? I don't think this can work. And so I actually think a lot of I actually think a lot of businesses fail because they give up too early, because they don't realize how long it actually does take to make a business work. And that's why I wanted to interview founders who had bagged their 100K and surpassed that, because I wanted to know the reality. Because some of the businesses, they're now like worth 600 million, but they still had that messy phase of, we might not make it, we might fail, we might not be able to make money, we don't know how to keep making this money. And so I think a lot of businesses fail because they give up too early, or they didn't care enough, and so that compounds giving up too early. Or sometimes life circumstances just mean they've got to stop, like the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic did throw a big spanner in the works, but it also provided like a lot of opportunity for people, and a lot of people to think really creatively and outside of the box and come up with new ideas. How do you know if an idea is the right one?
So in the book, I talk about the first 100 days, and essentially what I asked different founders and also thought about our own journey was, how do you figure out you're onto something? And this is beyond you saying, hey, do you like this thing? Or do you think this is a good idea? This isn't about people telling you that you're onto something. This is about you really testing it. And so the way to figure out is to basically think about, what's the quickest test, the cheapest test, the easiest test that I can do that tells me I'm onto something. And what you're essentially doing in that process is you're saying, okay, this is the problem or need I think I'm solving. These are the people I think I'm solving it for. And this is the solution I think is going to happen. So for example, there's a good example of Dropbox. They are now well-known,
Massive,
storage,
yeah.
all of that. And the way they started, especially because they were technically complex, they put a demo video together and then they put it on like Hacker News or a forum and things like that. And they got 70,000 signups to their wait list.
Wow.
So then they're like, we're onto something. People want this. People are potentially going to pay for it as well. So you might also say, hey, we're doing a freemium model and then trying to test the product. And what you're trying to do is, how do I not build up the whole thing and spend like years and years on this product, but how do I figure things out? There's another person I interviewed called Alex de Pledge, and she wanted to start architectural practice, which would be a lot more lean than what's out there now. What she did is she just put Facebook ads out describing what they're trying to solve for people. And then what happened with the ads is you'd then be able to call them. And then they spent time on the phone trying to convert that person into a sale. And what's also really valuable is on that phone call, you're understanding what this customer has actually thought they're buying. You're understanding what they actually want you to build. And so those are both two examples of people who went on to build massively incredible companies, but the early steps was just, how do I test that someone wants to pay for this? And then the rest of it is, how do I figure out how to keep doing it? How do I do it at scale? How do I make profit? And how do I find a good team to help make it all work?
So it's this idea, I guess, of like move fast, break things, hypothesize. It's great to have a hypothesis. I think this will work. Test it and then like iterate.
There is also a sense of when you know. And I interview Uncle Khalid in the book, who started Chicken Cottage, which then grew into a chain of 143 stores, and then he sold it to a Malaysian family office. And for him, he was working at KFC. He saw there was a gap in the market for chicken shops. If you're in London especially, chicken shops are everywhere and they're always halal. He was in an era where chicken shops weren't halal. And he was like, okay, I think I'm onto something, like I'm pretty sure. And so for him, it was, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to go open a unit. I'm going to start frying chicken. I'm going to sell it. And, it worked out for him.
And do you think that like, there's a lot of people who will, dream up ideas. They'll get really married to an idea and they'll kind of almost build it like in the dark, and it'll be this great big thing that they're building in. It's a great big secret, and they'll work up to it. And then all of a sudden they're like, ta-da!
Yeah.
And then crickets.
Yeah. I think that is like I think that route increases your chances of failure, because you have to be able to keep talking to people that you're building for. And also, companies never really become successful from that one ta-da. It's like a series of iterations. So the quicker you start that iteration process, like Dropbox, like Alex, the quicker you can say, okay, we're onto something. This is the right, because one small decision can send you down two different paths, right? So you have to constantly be talking to people. I would really recommend a book called The Mum Test, which is all about how to talk to people, how to interview them, how to make sure you're not biasing them for them to turn around and go, yeah, this is really good. I love it.
Great idea. Yeah. I guess in that situation, you're kind of really getting as honest feedback as you possibly can. Not people who are just going to be like, like the mum says like, I think it's amazing. Like, and you it could be start a podcast and only your dad's tuning in, like, or like, that's the kind of situation you want it to build something that has the reach, that has the capacity, because otherwise you'll end up probably dwindling all of your savings and not being able to grow, which is not what we want. One of the things I think you talk about, obviously you mentioned it earlier about your first 100 days, like, when you're describing the messiness of this first 100K, give us the reality. What have people told you? Like, how are actually most people making their first 100K?
So the first 100K is what I describe in the book as the cowboy 100K. And that's because what you're doing is you almost feel lucky that anyone's giving you money. And you're just hunting, you're talking to people, you're hustling, you're going from meetings to meetings. If someone says, let's have a chat, you're like, yeah, sure, let's see what happens. You might even sell dreams. Someone might say, can your product do this and that? And you're like, yeah, sure. And then you go back to team, you say, we've got to be able to do this, And the key thing about that Cowboy 100K is it doesn't feel repeatable. So for example, Faris, who sells coffee, he was like, I'd get an order for $4.50 here, for $6.50 here, like high value orders, and then crickets, nothing. And it kind of felt like luck. People would just be like, hey, we're looking for like corporate gifting. Can we buy some of your specialty coffee? And then it was like, oh yeah, we're onto something. And then suddenly you're not. And so that first 100K, Rich, who now has a SaaS platform and is on like Series 100 or whatever he is, he's worth 600 million in terms of his company. His first 100K was selling Wellington boots for festivals because they needed to make money to keep building what they were building, because they were also building something really technically complex. And then what he started doing is what he calls white glove treatment. And that's where he knew he wanted to build a technical solution to something, but he still had to figure out what are the key pain points for our potential clients. So he'd approach a client and he'd say, look, we'll build you whatever it is that you need, bespoke, so not scalable, really clunky, really difficult, but they charge for it. And he goes, so you're getting paid through the process. You're also going to learn a lot. But the key is it's part of the iteration process. And so the first 100K for some people as well, what I've seen, and including for us, consultancy and talks is like the bridging gap into like a proper product, if that's not what your main product is. So there was like a year where majority of our revenue was just me doing talks. And it was companies, oh, here's 10 grand here, 5 grand here. And you're like, oh my God, this is like a lot of money, but it's not sustainable. It's not a product. You could then go down that route and say, look, I'm the product.
I'm a full-time speaker and that's my job.
What we're going to build.
Yeah.
But that's not what we were trying to build.
Yeah.
And then when you can actually understand how to repeat money, that's when you're coming out of your cowboy phase into like your real 100K.
And how long do you think it typically takes people to do that? I mean, am I asking you how long is a piece of string?
Yeah, because if I was to give you like a minimum end, or average, let's say average, from everyone that I've spoken to, I'd say 2 to 3 years, probably. And obviously it really varies. But I say that because like your first year is you literally figuring out what is it that you're doing, what is it you're building. Your second year is, okay, I think we can make money from these people, and these people have given us a bit of money. So maybe if we speak to more people like this, then we might make more money. And then you're still trying to figure that out. And then once you find that repeatability, I would say 3. But for some people it's 6, for some people it's 7, for some, there is no like definitive answer, because there's so many other factors, like the market could change, for example, or your own personal situation could change, or you've gone from full-time to part-time, or you might have like a really great co-founder or someone that you can bring on and helps you supercharge that. There might just be one meeting that ends up opening loads of doors for you. Like it honestly is.
I think a lot of people wouldn't have expected you to say like 2 to 3 is like normally the minimum or like the average of what you're seeing. I think a lot of people think like you can just start a business and let's go. Like it really does take a long time. And I think this is the point where most people would go to you like, what if I don't have confidence? What if I feel like I've got imposter syndrome? What do you think on that?
Dun, dun, dun. I've gone on a big journey with imposter syndrome, as you will know because you've read the book. So much so that I wrote a chapter called The Myth of Imposter Syndrome. And I think about imposter syndrome in 2 ways. There's one side of imposter syndrome where actually it's just a hard thing you're doing. It's going to feel hard. There was no version in which it was going to feel like a breeze. It was going to feel easy. When I was starting Amalia, I had pretty much just come out of university. I'd worked for my uni. I went into an accelerator, which was like super intense. I then raised investment off the back of it. There was no version in which I was going to go, cool, like, this is easy. I've got these investors. I've raised some money. I'm going to make a business work. Like, of course, there was no version of that was going to exist. And I think what I started realizing is when I was speaking to more and more founders, they all, when you lifted the bonnet under the car, things weren't as they seemed. And so it was always going to feel scary. So there are some things where you kind of have to say to yourself, it's okay to feel like this. It doesn't mean it's imposter syndrome. It doesn't mean I'm lucky to be here. It doesn't mean that, someone's going to find out. It doesn't mean, I'm the token of whatever it is. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is I think imposter syndrome is sold to women as an individual problem when actually often we're existing in rooms, in spaces, in industries which are not welcoming of us and treat us like imposters. And I say this because in the early years, particularly, even now, to be honest, like I would often be in rooms, for example, on the accelerator, every Wednesday, they would put mentors and investors in front of us and we'd have to network our ass off and like pitch to them and talk to them. Out of maybe 100, 2 were women. So what is that telling me? That is telling me the experts on the other side, the people who know what they're doing in business aren't women. They're men. And so then what does that mean about me? How am I ever going to be on the other side of the table? Maybe I'm lucky to be here because also guess what? All the other CEOs on this accelerator are men. And so we're constantly given these stories and these signals that tell us, you're an imposter. You're not meant to be in this room. Look, there's no one else that looks like you. Look, there's no other women. Oh, look, maybe you are lucky. Maybe they just chose you as the diversity quota. Da, 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 da. All these voices in your head when we don't stop to think and say, maybe the room's the problem. Maybe it's not me.
100%.
And we see that because in like peak girl boss era, it was like, oh, like don't apologize in emails. Don't put exclamation marks. God forbid you sound too excited. And again, it's not a problem for me to do that. The problem is the person on the receiving end thinks by nature of me being a woman, I'm incompetent. Therefore, me being an excited woman, I'm even more incompetent. And so for me, it's not that confidence can't grow. And, I started with very little confidence, but I realized that once I was able to filter between when is it the room that's a problem and when is it something I have to work on, suddenly you have mental clarity and suddenly you're like, okay, I'm just going to work on it like I'll work on any other skill.
I think it's such a refreshing way of looking at imposter syndrome because it is this thing that gets thrown around all the time. And more often than not, it is directed at women in the room. And you're like, do you want to ask the guys that? Yeah. It's like the same question about, when people are asking people about, motherhood and all that kind of stuff and having kids and things like it does feel like sometimes it's negatively sent in like female founders' direction. Yeah. And you're like, God, this too, this I have to put up with everything else and this as well. Like, so it is just that extra burden. And I think if you can reframe it with everything that you've just said there, it should hopefully provide our listeners with that little bit more of confidence. Yeah, for sure. One of the things that we both 100% agree on, that in order to build a successful business, you really need a strong network around you. How, if you've come from somewhere where you feel like you haven't got the strongest connections, you haven't got the easiest links in, what are the ways in? Like, how do you find the people that are going to help you make your first 100K?
Yeah. So there's a couple of ways. One is look for ready-made networks. So like one of the things that the accelerator did for us was gave us a black book because every Wednesday we were talking to people. It almost opens the door and says, look, there's a room full of people here. Get in and talk to them. But often you're searching for the door. And so networks are really good ways to just get your foot in. And now, like compared to 8 years ago, there are so many business networks, startup networks, festivals, conferences. And so early on, I was just constantly trying to find where are my people or where are people that I think could help me. The other thing is I would think about, okay, who's the most connected person I know? At that point, it was my manager. And I said to my manager, can you introduce me to someone? Like, can you introduce me to someone that could help me? And if you don't feel like you have that person in your direct contacts, go on LinkedIn, find people, go on Twitter, go on TikTok. Like there are so many ways to find people and what they're about. And especially if you're young, if you're in your 20s, people are really willing to say, yeah, sure, I'll have a chat. Yeah, sure, I'll help you out. Which is what always really surprised me. People really, if you can show you've got passion, you're building something and you're really trying to move forward, people will be like, yeah, sure, I'll have a chat. I also am a huge advocate of cold emails. Cold emails are basically when you reach out to someone that you don't know, well, they don't know you, and you just sell yourself to them. You just pitch to them. The thing that I would always say is don't ask people for a coffee, because I think it's a big way to turn someone off. What you want to do is you want to be really respectful of people's time. You want the way I usually used to do it is I would email someone and I would say, hey, blah, blah, this is what I'm doing. Make it really personalized of why you're reaching out to them. Tell them what progress you're making. And if you haven't Googled it, don't ask them the question, and say, I would really just appreciate if I was able to drop a couple of questions over email, if you can get back to me. If they don't get back to you, your follow-up game has to be A1. Like, I mean, like follow up 7 times. Like constantly follow
7
up.
times.
Yeah, constantly follow up.
Love it.
And it could be, the first one could just be like, hey, just wanted to bump this up your inbox. Would love to hear your thoughts. Another one could be you see an article that you think might be interesting to share with them and you say, hey, came across this, da, da, da. Another one might be like you've made progress and you say, oh, I've actually done da, da, da. Would still really like to have those thoughts, like hear your thoughts. And normally you're trying to think, what's the smallest way this person could interact with me that doesn't burden them, but gets their attention. And then you kind of develop from there. You've got to build your rapport. You got to earn your stripes to have the coffee, basically, especially if there's an imbalance of power dynamic, because the likelihood is the person that you're trying to ask advice, the likelihood is the person you're trying to ask out for coffee is really busy. They are booked and busy and they're seeing this email and they're like, I don't have time. So you're already like taking yourself out of their headspace. But if it's like a tiny ask, then they might.
I think a lot of people feel really like offended or like, put off if like they don't get a reply the first time. Like, how can we stop ourselves from like not feeling that way?
I think about it as like the more no's you have, the closer you are to a yes. And I think about it like this, like I know my inbox is always got so many things coming in. I know myself that I look at stuff and I'm like, I'll reply to that again or whatever. So just think about people on the other side. Most of the time it is not personal. So just almost thinking of it as a clinical thing of like, I've emailed this person, I'm going to follow them up, and take out the emotion of like, what if they think I'm this? What if they think I'm being like too pushy? What if they da-da-da? Just keep following up. If they really don't want to talk to you, they'll tell you.
Yeah.
And so until you get a no,
away, unsubscribe. Like,
I've had people reply to me saying unsubscribe, and I'm like, that is so awkward because this is not a
spam. I'm genuine. Can you not read the personalization in that email?
And that's the thing. If they really don't want you to email, they'll tell you to go away.
And I always think that if they are ever that rude, just think back in your head, like, okay, see you in 5 years when you've missed this boat.
Yeah.
That is genuinely how I often feel about this time. I'd be like, you'll look back and you'll be like asking me to come on to your platform, this, and I'll be like, I'll remember that. Because that has genuinely happened to me, like in a very small scale. I'm not talking anyone massive, but like people who, like, this is very random, but like when I left teaching, I moved into the events industry, and I asked if I could intern at a very small events company and just asked if they had like a little bit like a job so I can work with them. Like just, I'd left being a teacher and I was just trying to get some experience in the events industry. Not like, I just literally like got basically the rudest reply. And then when we launched 20s Fest, they pitched in to be one of our suppliers.
Oh my God.
And I was like,
that.
Oh, okay. And I remembered because of that. So I do think that like also like those moments might also happen for you. And so you just have to kind of be like,
you have to have a sense of thick skin. Like I remember I was across the table from an investor at one of these like speed networking things. And I was like, oh, here's our business card. And he slid it back and he went, I won't need it. And I was like, okay then. Like you have to have thick skin. So when you've gone through stuff like that, and then I remember another guy who was like, so this is a hobby.
Yeah.
And I
we
was
get that
like,
all the time.
You know?
Yeah.
And so when you've
It's
had
my job,
experiences
guys.
like that to your face,
Yeah.
following up an email is light work.
Yeah.
You know?
No, absolutely. So I think one of probably the biggest questions that, our listeners will want to hear is, how do you get good at sales? Because in order to make your first 100K, you have to be able to sell something. You have to be able to sell yourself, your services, your business, whatever it is.
Yep.
What are some tips that you've learned along the way that you would share for people really wanting to get good at the sales part of their business?
So for me, I never thought of myself as a salesperson.
No.
I wonder
It sometimes
why.
feels icky. Ew, don't want to sell. It's so icky. Like, yeah.
It does. And also often the examples that we're given of who's a salesperson, very slimy, very,
you just think
normally
like,
a man.
They're selling like a used cars
It's like
dealer
making me
or stuff like
cringe
that.
just thinking.
No, we don't want to be that kind of person. How do we sell stuff in our business without feeling like that?
So I think the first thing is sales, think of it as a conversation, right? And then the second thing is, especially if you're building your own thing, you believe in what you're building. You are passionate about what you're building. So this is just going to be a passionate conversation. That's what you're going to have. And ultimately what sales is someone has found you or you found them. They want to have a chat. And what you're doing in that conversation is you're understanding what is this person's hopes and needs, right? Then you're trying to understand, do we have the solution to match up to their hopes and needs? Because also part of sales is knowing who you shouldn't be talking to. You can waste a lot of time speaking to the wrong people.
Much time, yeah.
And what you're basically doing when you're selling is you're having a conversation where you're proposing your solution as the solution to their hopes and dreams and needs, right? And this can look like you've got a presentation, you've got a deck, it could be on a phone call, it could be in person, it could be over coffee, and you have to be ready for all those instances depending on, what your industry's like. And what you want to do is you really want to listen to what they're saying. So, when you go on, you've seen on the news and you see a politician and they're asked a question and then they just keep repeating. They keep saying their same lines.
Jumping in and
they keep just saying their same lines. They're not going to go off script.
Yeah.
With sales, you have to know how to go off script because you have to hear what the person's saying. So for example, say you're pitching for investment, right? Which is a type of selling. You might have an investor who really cares about the data. You might have a different investor who actually cares about you as a founder and why you're doing this. You need to understand that from what they're saying, okay, this is a certain profile that I'm dealing with. I now need to speak their language. So with the one that cares about data, you've got to have your numbers inside out. The one that cares about you as a founder, you're going to dial up. You're going to dial up whatever it is in that conversation that speaks to their hopes, that speaks to their needs. And so that's when, if you see it as a conversation where you're just having a passionate conversation, right? And you're thinking about, how do I dynamically respond to why they're sitting in front of me? At the same time, you might find out in that conversation that they're not the person, and then you just want to keep a good contact, right? You just want to make sure that the conversation is good. You kind of already understood they're not looking for what you're doing, but never write anyone off because you don't know where they might go on to, what company. I've had people who have gone into another company and then we've ended up working with them there, but they weren't right when they were in the old company. So yeah, with sales, it's a conversation. It's a conversation where you really have to listen. You don't want to go in there and just be rigid with, this is what we are, this is what we're building.
I think that's it, isn't it? Like if you're over like rehearsed or you're literally saying the same things or you're not actually responding back, then people don't feel like they've really got to warm to you. And I think that's where the personalization comes back, isn't it? And it's like, if you're like you say, like a politician, like literally just regurgitating the same thing and like talking over people, people are going to be like, I can't relate to that guy, that guy or that woman. I can't do that. So they're just not going to do, like you say, like tailoring that pitch. So key. Amazing. So the one thing that I think is difficult for founders when things get tough, like times get hard, how do you keep going?
So I write this as the final chapter, which is like what to do if your startup is dying. And I remember Alex saying years ago, like this was 2016, and she said, if you think your startup is dying, it probably is. And I think the biggest thing is you can't bury your head in the sand. if you are someone who is trying to get a business off the ground, you have to be able to run towards your problems, not away from them. And so again, in your personal life, if you're someone who is avoidant, if you're someone who runs away from your problems, that's going to show up in your business. With how do you keep going? I mean, it's really tough, right? But I think the key thing is understanding it's okay if you're not enjoying the process, like it is really difficult. And I think sometimes what happens is because people feel maybe miserable or that it's really difficult, they think it's not working. But I've yet to meet a founder who hasn't had those periods, even if they're doing well, who doesn't have those periods of time where they're like, this is really difficult. I always say to friends when I catch up with them, I say on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being everything's great, 1 being I want to go get a job. Where are you?
That's such an interesting question. I think so many people would probably answer that. Like, I mean, for me, it would fluctuate all the time.
Yeah,
I think it does. Like, it's supposed to change.
It does, and I think that's the thing. It's why I wrote the chapter, because I think we hear so much about like, oh, working for yourself is amazing, blah blah, and absolutely, it has loads of perks. It's incredible to. I don't think I would want to do anything else than run a business.
Yeah.
But it's really tough. And normally the things that are our source of ambition and big goals is usually also the thing that is going to bring us a lot of misery. I still, dip in and out of burnout. I still am trying to figure out, I'm trying to always look at my own boundaries and my own limits and things like that. But ultimately, what I've come to realize is the more financially comfortable you are in your business, the easier it is to keep going. And I say that because I've been in a place where it's been only 2 of us, we're hustling, we're not making a lot of money, we're like on 12K each, it's difficult, you're like, God, like, why would you do this,
Yeah.
To then being able to grow into a team where you're working with incredibly competent people who, before you used to be 10 departments and now they've taken so much of your load, and that comes with making money, right? And so I think that the best way to keep going is to be able to build a team, be able to build the infrastructure that you need so that a business doesn't solely rely on you and your willpower and your effort and your mental health and your physical health and all the things that you put on the line in order to get a business off the ground. And this is why, back to your first question of like, why do businesses fail, is because often people are up against the clock, and not only is money dwindling, but you as a person, you're being chipped away at.
Yeah,
and so you have to
energy.
be really resilient. And I think I've come to realize that resilience is something that you can build. It is something that you have to build if you're going to run a business. And I don't want to make it sound like we're like going to battle, but it's difficult. Things can happen in your business that require you to say, do you know what? Tomorrow we go again.
Yeah. You mentioned there obviously about growing a team. And I think when I think about growing a team, it's very much like chicken and egg scenario.
Yeah.
So it's like you need a team to make money, but in order to make money, you need a team. And like at what point do you like jump into that cycle? Like what I know you've got a bit about it in the book, but like what do you think about growing a team when you're basically broke?
So
let's be real. Most people are going to want to know the answer to that question.
So when you're broke, you're basically begging, borrowing and stealing. Honestly, like when you're broke, your first port of call is, are there passionate people I can bring on that are going to help me? And some of them might be incentivized by things that aren't money, right? There are a lot of people out there who are in jobs that they don't like, right?
Yeah.
And they want to be a part of something that is exciting. They want to be a part of something that is interesting. They might want to be a part of something that's helping them build a skill set that they're currently not building. So your first port of call is like, how can I find people who want to genuinely work on this and money almost isn't a factor for them? And this comes back to your networking. This comes back to your ability to also sell your vision and say, listen, this is where we're going, because that's all you have at that point. You've just got words to sort of back where you're going. And then once you've got some sense of, okay, this is how we make money, this is how we build, this is how we work, what you're looking for, the point at which you're trying to hire, is where you have some sort of repeatability. or some sort of bottleneck that is stopping you from growing. So the example I give in the book is, say your events business, right? You've got events, they're happening every weekend, and you then find yourself in a place where you can't take on new bookings because you're at capacity. There's no other people to help put on events. So in that case, you've de-risked yourself because you can either bring someone on to do the operational side of things, and that way you can onboard new business and you can also be part of the operational side of getting more events on. Or you can say, I'm going to stay in the operation side, but I'm going to get someone to onboard new business. But the key thing is you want to understand what's your highest value set. Where is your time best spent within the business? What are the things that you could give to other people that mean that you can then increase that time? And usually when you're starting out, the founder is the most compelling person to bring in revenue, sales, and close those deals. So you're trying to make sure that majority of your time is on that. And that way you're basically able to say, if we bring on this person, this is what we forecast is going to happen, and therefore it pays for itself. So essentially, costs follow income, right? So the income come and then the costs can come out of that income. There might be a sense that you have, again, like a lot of it is gut intuition. You can see where the business is going, where you can see that before it's there. And normally people will say hire 3 months before you hit that problem, because then by the time you're at 3 months, you're like, it's just easier to do it myself instead of like onboard someone, because that's
it
time
takes
out,
time for someone
know?
to get settled within a company. Like it really does take, a good 3-6 months for them to really like get the culture, get into a rhythm, get confident at what they're doing. Like it's very rare that, someone comes in and picks stuff up straight away and it's just like, oh, lifesaver.
Especially if you're a small business, because there's probably so much in your head.
Yes.
That's not documented. So the first 3 months is them just asking you questions and you saying, oh yeah, I should probably write that down.
Yeah. And putting processes in place, because I think like if you are just a small team, the processes is like just the things that you probably innately kind of do or have done, or, it's hidden in this thing and then you need to give them access to this and shared emails and all this kind of stuff.
Access is like the...
it's a lot, isn't it? To basically be like, oh, this is in this place here. It's also like finding stuff. It's like a minefield.
Yeah.
It's
sign
like, here's
sign
a maze.
up to OnePass or LastPass, guys. It is the best onboarding that we've been able to do.
Is that to save all your passwords and stuff?
Yeah, passwords, and you can create different vaults. So like if someone's joining a social team, you say, here's everything you need for socials. If someone's joining like events team, here's everything,
There we go. That's a good one. We don't actually use that. We will be using that from now on. So we always like to discuss some of our biggest adulting failures on the Talk 20s podcast. Nafisa, looking back at your 20s, like, is there a moment in time where you went, that is a huge adulting fail? It can be a funny, it can be business related, it can be anything. Just a time when you feel like, I really shouldn't have done that, even if it turned out positive in the end.
Yeah. It was probably when there was someone who wanted to sue us and we didn't have business insurance.
Oh, shit.
And I don't know, I feel like all the talks I watched, all the conferences I
Never
went,
mentioned that.
because it's such a dry thing, right?
Mm.
And I remember talking to like a legal expert and they were like, oh, so your business insurance would be able to cover the costs.
Yeah.
And like,
is that professional indemnity? Is that right or no? Am I talking about something else?
Indemnity,
Liability.
all of it is under like one.
Yeah.
There's like defamation, loads of stuff. Right now we have it. And I remember literally for a month, every morning and every night, I was panicking because I didn't know the outcome of this, right? And I was terrified because I was like, this is such a stupid mistake, right? And at the same time, I'm like, I genuinely, like, I've been through an accelerator where every week they'd do a workshop and say, this is what you need. They'd even done like a whole workshop about how to move your business to America and the legal documents you need and blah, blah, blah. Like...
You're like, I didn't need that. I needed the one where I was going to get sued. Yeah.
And I remember just being in sheer panic.
First of all, like, why did they want to sue you though?
Basically, they thought that we owed them money, right? In a contract dispute. Long story short, I knew from the contract we didn't, right? But they were still going for it. And they were becoming quite, they were using intimidation tactics, right? And like, for example, in their emails, they would be referencing a lawyer. They would da-da-da. And I was like, we are
lawyer.
I was like, we're getting cleaned out.
Yeah.
We're getting absolutely cleaned out. And then this is where network comes into play because I messaged friends, I messaged founders. I was like, listen, I need a watertight legal person. And then ended up, one of the founders I used to share office space with, his mum is a lawyer.
Oh.
And at a big fancy law firm too.
Yeah.
And she wrote us a letter. It cost us £1,800 to pay for that letter, which was a lot of money for us.
Yeah.
It still is a lot of money.
Yeah.
But then when you're like, how do we make money? She wrote a letter which basically was like, hi, according to legal speak, we sent that letter, case closed. I dodged a huge bullet. And I remember like being so berating of myself because I was like, what the hell? But I was like, listen, lesson learned. On the phone to brokers, on the phone to please sort us out, you know? So that was one of those moments where I was like, I was really close. And it was me, it was my fault. It was all on me, you know?
In that moment, like, did you like let it get to you a lot? Like, did it have an impact on the wider business?
Yeah, because in that moment, every day, every week, I remember that was a time where I said to myself, I'm not going to open emails at nighttime before I go to bed because I didn't know what I was terrified of what I was going to read because we were going back and forth. I was Googling legal speak. I was Googling how, you know, like it was all consuming. And in the back of my head, I'm like, oh my God, there's a lot of money. What are we going to do? This, another. And then when I realized that, okay, I've again, get your head out of the sand, run towards the problem, got to fix it. That's when I kind of go from like a sulking mode to, oh my God, what have I done, to, right, we're going to fix it.
And one of the other things we like to talk on the podcast is that even though you've written an amazing book on how to make money, and I'm going to make the assumption your business is making money right now and is doing really well, which is amazing, we all still have challenges that we're facing and none of us is like the finished product. None of us are perfect. So what are you trying to work on at this moment in time that you feel is an area that you might feel isn't quite perfect, or you just want to feel like improvement in your life?
Yeah, I think from a business perspective and then personal, from a business perspective, I'm trying to think of, in 5 years' time, how do we become less reliant on the revenue streams that we currently have? And that's like a bigger existential, where do we go next? What do we do?
And for you guys, what are your revenue streams right now?
Brand partnerships, events, consultancy. That is like our main bags. And so for us, I'm at the moment, my big piece of work is like, what will not be true in 5 years' time?
Yeah.
How will the landscape change? How will the market change? You have to constantly think ahead of the market. So that's like the big question. From an individual place, the thing that I'm trying to work on is giving more positive feedback and praise. I think that comes from when you've started something and you don't have managers above you, you don't have people above you saying, well done, you did so well, oh my gosh, this, no one's really doing your appraisals and things like that. You kind of just keep going. You just go, you know, if someone praises you, they might praise you. And I think I sometimes take for granted that not everyone operates like that. And so with my team, especially, I know I don't give them enough praise. So shout out to my team. I'm trying to always remind myself that while I may not need to hear, oh, you're killing it, you're smart. I mean, it's lovely to hear it, don't get me wrong. But I'm trying to work more on making sure that other people feel valued and other people feel like they have played an incredible role in the business or in a project or whatever it is. And I think it's like a habit to be built. I am very like, I'll see something. I have to consciously say to myself, say the good stuff, then, you know, the shit sandwich.
Yeah.
And because if you gave me feedback, I'm fine with you saying, oh, change this, don't like this,
Yeah.
Whereas I'm like, I consciously have to say, oh, this was really good. There's just a couple of things I would, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that comes from like a culture of like fast, move, just keep going this way, that way, this is working, this isn't working. But as you scale up into a larger team, it's really important that people feel valued. It's really important. And so I think if my team were to give me feedback, and some team members have, it would probably be that I need to give more praise, because it's probably a reflection of how I speak to myself.
Which is, I do think like a business is often a reflection of who the founder is and like how you kind of, want to, your previous experiences, maybe the way you like to receive feedback. And I think it's hard when you start to bring new team members in who have different wants and needs, different ways of learning, different ways of understanding things, different, times when some people work better in the morning, some people work better in the afternoon. And it kind of, as your team grows, you kind of have to, I guess, be way more aware of like people's wants and needs, I guess, which is always quite tricky, I think.
Yeah.
Well, Nafisa, I am so glad we finally got this episode of the podcast in. It has been amazing to chat to you. We have only really tapped into like the smallest amount of all the goodness that's in your book, but tell all our listeners where they can get a copy of the book, so that they can find out a little bit more.
You can get it at all good bookshops. You can get it on Amazon, Waterstones, literally everywhere. It's in hardback, paperback, Kindle, audiobook, and
Has the paperback already come out then? When did that come out?
Yeah. It came out 18th of Feb.
I've heard something recently that actually all the good books, if it was a good book, it comes out in paperback.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that was a thing.
I didn't know that either.
It must be a great book if it made the paperback.
There you go.
It's pretty good. So yeah, congratulations. It honestly is, for me, one of the best books I've read that's most relatable to me and where I'm at in business right now. So congratulations on writing a fantastic book. Before I ask you the final question that we always ask all of our guests, I have to do a huge shout out to our amazing drink sponsors, Riviera Iced Tea. You had a little taste of it before the podcast.
It's really nice.
Really, really good. The peach iced tea in particular, super great, guys. But Nafisa, we always end the podcast by asking our guests the same question. And it's if you could look back at 20-year-old Nafisa and give her just one piece of advice that would see her through her 20s. Yep. You can only say one thing to her. Like you're in a little time warp, you just pop up a little mirage or whatever, and you say one thing. What would you want to say to her?
I think I would say to her, learn how to rupture and repair relationships really quickly and don't let it build up. And I think this comes back to like at the core of businesses is relationships. And the art is that there will be difficulties, there will be disagreements, there will be differences, but you have to be able to learn how to rupture and repair quickly.
And how do you do that?
I think nip things in the bud really quickly. Like no matter how small it is, just be able to say, hey, that day we had that chat and I just wanted to air something out, and just put things on the table. Don't let things build up, because when they build up, that's when that random tiny thing like really will blow out. And that goes for like even like when you're hiring people, being able to have like a really good culture of feedback and be able to say, hey, can we just do this a bit differently? And it doesn't have to be confrontational. It can just be, hey, just a quick note, mention this. So yeah, it's more, do it more regularly and more often, have that culture of feedback, don't let things build up, and don't be scared to have those conversations as well.
Wise words. And I think also, I don't know if you kind of really experienced that because of the age of your employees as well. I can imagine they're not got a wild age gap as well.
Yeah.
Like, do you think that makes it even harder when there's like, I don't know how you feel about, your employees or your employees, but there's an element of like friendship. Like, do you have a view on that? Like,
I think for me, I'm quite good at being boundaried and like, this is a professional conversation, but we can definitely have a chatty patty and chill and go somewhere, you know? And again, I think the more regular you have check-ins, the more regular you have conversations, it opens that space. Like no one should ever feel, if I say to someone, hey, can we have a quick catch up? They shouldn't feel scared.
Yeah.
Because we regularly are having conversations and feedback. And then on the other side of that, if someone tells you that they're leaving your team and it comes as a surprise, you've done something wrong because you haven't had that regular catch up in that space to have that dialogue or to sort of understand where they're at.
Absolutely. Well, amazing, wise words. I have loved chatting with you today. Guys, make sure you come back next week for another amazing episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to leave us a comment down below or a 5-star review, and we'll see you next week.